All right, welcome to more about assessment. We're going to do a decently deep dive on project-based learning and problem-based learning. These are two areas that I've used extensively in my high school math classrooms. And I think that any and all teachers should really make use of project-based learning, both as a learning tool and as a testing or assessment tool as well. So it did give you a lot of information as you go through this, and to be clear, it can be used as a formative, a summative. It can be used informally. It can be used formally as a teaching tool. So it's really a highly flexible way of teaching and learning for your students. When done correctly, it is extremely awesome. When it's done poorly, it is absolutely wretched. So I would encourage you to do it properly. And if you're not going to do it properly, I'd encourage you not to do it. It's going to require your time, it's going to require your energy, and it's going to require you to really develop it over time. I actually had a thing when I taught high school that I would create, and my goal was to create one good project in each course per year. That was my goal, and we were on a block schedule, semester block schedule. So I developed the project, do it that one semester, and I'd repeat it the following semester after some refinements. Nor about the third or fourth time I did the project, it was fairly well solidified in its final form, or it was thrown away. So keep that in mind too. That sometimes the projects just don't work very well because the basis just doesn't work. But a couple of things to know about project-based learning. The biggest one is that it is a lengthy process. And that's one that a lot of people kind of have issues with. Students especially have issues. It can be a very lengthy process when done properly, but it is a median for learning and communicating knowledge, right? So that's the primary aspect of this. It's a lengthy project. In all good project-based learning, and PBL is what I'm using, the abbreviation I'm using here for project-based learning. All good project-based learning is rooted in one or two big topics. And then it has a lot of peripheral topics that go along with that. And that's how it builds up and becomes a good project. So let's just say that you want to teach linear equations to your high school students. Well, what are the things you want them to really know and understand about the linear equations? Slope, domain, range, how to write a linear equation, how to rewrite a linear equation in slope-intercept form, general forms, point-slope form. These are all different skills that are very much needed inside of a high school mathematics classroom. In fact, all of them. Even in geometry classes, there is a need for identifying and being able to find slope between 2 points, or at least understanding a lot of different aspects of slope. So for instance, perpendicular versus parallel. You can start digging in really, really deep with a lot of these different topics and how and what they're used for, right? So how do you develop a good project? Well, one of the things I did that I found was the most successful way to do this is I'd find someone else in my building who was not a math teacher. I taught math. I'd always find someone who wasn't a math teacher. My go-to person who was always willing to listen to me and talk to me was a gentleman who was an art teacher. And I would teach him the math lesson I wanted to teach the students. And he would teach a art lesson that popped up in his head about the math that I was been teaching. And then we'd go back and forth, and I would jump in and include somebody else, a biology teacher, an English teacher, a history teacher, someone else along the way who was willing to work with the topic in places where I saw it fit in. And in some cases, I actually, someone would suggest something, I'm like, oh, well, that might make sense, but I'm just not going to do that on this project. And so you have to kind of pick and choose what will work and what won't work, right? So just keep in mind that building the project is a whole nother aspect of things in of itself. And I have some examples if you find on my channel, my YouTube channel, that are different projects that I have done over time. One of them is a project I did for an advanced math class. And it was a house with no right angles, and I kind of go through the project and its basis for the students. And that was developed in conjunction with an art teacher and an architect who wasn't actually a teacher at all. It just kind of worked with those individuals. And I actually had an engineer come along and said, well, I never do any of the math like you're doing in that project, which was fine, because the project, and this is one of the things, digging into problem-based learning, is that there's been a push for a long time that mathematics be real-world applicable all the time, which doesn't necessarily have to be true. When we start talking about teaching and learning, the things the students are learning need to be relevant to them. We want it to be rigorous, absolutely, and that's been an overused word, and I don't think a lot of people really understand what rigor means inside of a mathematics classroom or any other classroom for that matter. I think a lot of people think they know what rigor is, but I don't really think they do. The idea is that we're not necessarily building something that is going to have real-world application. We're building something that is going to be relevant to the students in their learning, something that they're going to be able to access and engage with, something that they find decently enjoyable or at least interesting. So I had a drawing project that I did with linear equations, where I had them do a self-portrait and then using straight lines, and then found the equation for every single straight line in the portrait, which means since you're dealing with a line segment, they also had to find the domain and range. So there are a lot of skills that they were developing along the way of doing that project, and the drawing project was the basis for the activity. So was that real world applicable? Well, some would say yes, some would say no. And in digital art, you're not going to be dealing with the equations at all. So going through that process there's not really a whole lot in that particular process that was real world applicable. But it was very relevant to the students. They engaged in it extremely well because it was about them. It can become about them. It can become personalized. And this is where some of the formative pieces come into play. It would be done over the course, any one of my projects would be done over the course of about 2 weeks. And then they would turn it in. And I'll discuss different ideas or different approaches to rubrics in another video. But the idea behind the project is that they are doing this on a regular basis every day in class. We're discussing it. We're giving them time to work on the project. And you need to do regular check-ins with every single student. So some of you are thinking, well, there's no way I'm ever going to do that because that's a lot of work. And it's like, yes, and that's what teaching is, a lot of work. But the thing is that the payoff is worth it. It works. Imagine meeting with every single student as often as you possibly can over the course. Here's your project. Where are you at with your project? What are the things you have been doing? What are the things you're going to do next? And here are some things. Okay, you haven't done anything. We'll do this by tomorrow. Just this one thing. Do this by tomorrow. And then do this the next day. And do this the next day. And you have these regular check-ins that give you the ability to assess very, very accurately what the students do and do not understand. And the project is the medium for you to have that conversation. It's the medium for them to learn and for you to have that conversation with them. And that's really the purpose behind that project. And then you find that students engage at a much deeper level because of that communication piece. And they have an activity that goes along with their learning process that goes on for multiple days. And a lot of students found that. Now, the thing is, a lot of good projects are based in problems. So a lot of times what I would do is over the course of the project, I would have several problems built into the learning process for the students that related to the project. But they in themselves were short processes, taking up maybe 20 minutes of a class period, maybe less sometimes, but they were a problem that we would work through, a particular problem that was dealing with a particular skill as opposed to a collection of skills. A project is going to deal with a collection of skills. A problem is dealing mainly with a particular skill. Sometimes there might be one or two, but normally it's just a particular skill that you're going to be dealing with. And that's the difference between those two pieces is that you can build a really good project out of problems, and you can use problems to move students through a project. And the two of them, I think, go hand in hand with each other. And I do not think that is strictly devoted just to being a math process. Even when you're talking about problem-based learning, this can be done in a history class. This can be done in an English class. What are the problems that we're answering today? What is the overarching thing? So if you're doing Shakespeare in an English class, what's the problem that we're wanting to deal with? So what should have Hamlet's response been? when you're discussing a piece of literature, what could have happened, or what should have happened, or what is the response? How is so and so's response different than what we might have expected? Or there's lots of questions that you can ask and turn into problems. Like how would that same process play out in modern society? People talk about, well, that movie or this book didn't age well. Well, why didn't it age well? That in itself is an interesting problem to discuss, and that can be part of a larger overarching project. Now, when it comes to grading project-based learning, problems are pretty cut and dry. But when it comes to grading projects, there are a couple different ways to do this. There's the way I do it, and there's a way that other people do it. I do one process when I'm forced to do it because it's the way the rest of the group is, or it's the standardized way of that for that particular project. But when given my own choice, I do an all or nothing type grading process, and that's going to be a whole nother video. But when we do the grading for a projects for me were always really easy to grade because I already knew what they were done, what they looked like before they were done. Because I've done so many check-ins with students along the way, I was not surprised. I gathered a lot of data about what the students were learning as we went through that. So it is a lot of work, it's a lot of time, it's a lot of energy, but it's one of those things I would encourage you to really push in and try to do, because I think it's a really good assessment tool. I think it's one of the most powerful assessment tools that we have at our disposal as teachers. Please reach out as you have questions. If you want more information about this particular topic, I'll be more than happy to do additional discussions. And keep in mind also that I have another video out there about project-based learning where I actually go through an entire project that I have used in my high school classrooms. All right, take care.